Sir, are you deaf? I said this isn't a soup kitchen for strays. The voice was sharp, laced with the self-important authority of a man in a freshly pressed uniform. Marcus Finch, the newly appointed senior park administrator, stood with his hands on his hips, his posture a perfect imitation of every drill sergeant he'd ever seen in the movies. He looked down at the old man sitting on the park bench, the salty sea breeze doing nothing to cool his manufactured indignation. The man, Jedediah, didn't look up. His attention was on the old golden retriever at his feet, whose tail gave a weak, hopeful thump against the pavement. Jed was carefully flaking pieces from a small can of tuna onto a piece of wax paper, his gnarled, liver-spotted hands moving with a slow, deliberate grace. The dog, Buddy, ate each piece gently, looking up at his master with eyes full of unwavering trust. "I'm talking to you, old man," Finch pressed on, his voice rising in volume. Park Ordinance 113B clearly states that feeding animals, domestic or wild, is strictly prohibited. It creates a public nuisance. Jedediah finally looked up. His eyes were the color of a faded sky, deep set in a face that was a roadmap of a long, hard life. There was no anger in them, no fear, just a quiet weariness. "He's not a stray," Jed said, his voice a low rumble, like stones shifting deep underground. "And I'll clean up after him." He gestured to a small, neatly folded plastic bag on the bench beside him. Finch scoffed, a short, ugly sound. "That's not the point. The point is rules. The point is order. This is a public park, a place for families, not a flop house for you and your mutt." He looked Jedediah up and down, taking in the frayed cuffs of his canvas jacket, the worn-out soles of his boots, and the simple, almost threadbare nature of his clothes. The man looked like he'd been carved from driftwood and left to dry in the sun for 70 years. To Finch, he was just another piece of urban decay he was hired to scrub clean. A little ways down the seaside promenade, Officer Grant paused his patrol. He leaned against his cruiser, sipping a lukewarm coffee, and watched the interaction. He was a young cop, but he'd done 2 tours in the Helmand province before trading his Marine Corps uniform for a police blue one. His internal radar, the one that had kept him alive through countless patrols, was pinging. It wasn't the park administrator Finch, he was just a peacock, all puffed up feathers and noise. It was the old man. There was something in his posture, even sitting down. It was a kind of stillness Grant had only ever seen in 2 types of people: those who were about to die and those who had decided, long ago, who was going to die. It was a stillness of absolute control, an economy of motion that spoke of immense energy held in reserve. Finch was escalating, his voice becoming a theatrical boom for the benefit of the few passers-by who were now slowing to watch the little drama. Quote 6. At the word, quote 7, Buddy let out a low whine and pressed his head against Jedediah's leg. The old man placed a calming hand on the dog's neck, his fingers sinking into the thick golden fur. He didn't say a word. His silence seemed to infuriate Finch even more. It was like shouting at a mountain. The lack of response was an insult in itself. "Do you have any identification?" Finch demanded, pulling a citation book from his pocket with a flourish. "Or are you going to make this difficult?" Jedediah sighed, a soft exhalation of breath, and reached slowly into his jacket pocket. Finch, mistaking the slow movement for defiance or a threat, took a step forward and grabbed the old man's arm. He snarled, his face inches from the old man's. It was a mistake. As Finch yanked on the sleeve of the worn jacket, the fabric pulled tight and the cuff rode up Jedediah's wrist. For a split second, a piece of faded ink was exposed to the afternoon sun. Officer Grant, watching from a distance, felt the coffee cup slip in his hand. He didn't drop it, his training too deeply ingrained, but his knuckles went white. He knew tattoos. Every grunt and devil dog he'd ever served with had them. But this was different. It wasn't a sloppy bulldog or a pin-up girl. It was a masterfully inked, albeit ancient, image of a phoenix rising from a cascade of flames. And nestled in the heart of the fire, just below the bird's talons, was a single, five-pointed star. Grant's blood ran cold. He'd seen that symbol once before, in a heavily redacted intelligence briefing at Bagram. It was a ghost story, a myth whispered about in the Spec Ops community. Phoenix, a unit so far above top secret that it didn't officially exist. They were the troubleshooters, the last resort, the men they sent in when God himself had given up. They answered to no one but a select few, and their operational history was a litany of impossible successes buried under layers of classification. To see that mark on the wrist of a quiet old man feeding his dog tuna in a public park was like seeing a unicorn grazing on the White House lawn. Grant pushed himself off the cruiser. His walk became a stride. He wasn't running, but he was moving with purpose now. He had to intervene before this idiot Finch crossed a line from which there was no return. He had a sudden, chilling vision of Finch trying to put cuffs on this man, and he knew with absolute certainty that it would be the last thing Marcus Finch ever did. Finch, oblivious, saw only the arm of a frail old man. He released it with a shove. Nothing, just an empty pocket, of course. He sneered, his eyes scanning Jedediah with renewed contempt. You probably spent your last dime on that can of fish. You know, we have services for people like you, shelters. You don't have to live like this, cluttering up the view for decent tax-paying citizens. He gestured vaguely at the ocean, as if Jedediah's very presence was an affront to the natural beauty of the coastline. A couple of teenagers snickered nearby, filming the confrontation on their phones. An older woman pulled her child closer, hurrying past. The public stage was set, and Finch was playing the leading role in his own mind, the brave civil servant taming the urban wilderness. Côte Azul. Finch continued, his voice dripping with condescension. Quote 14 on. He waved a dismissive hand at Jedediah's entire being. Jedediah's gaze flickered for a moment. It wasn't anger. It was something deeper. A flash of an old memory, a ghost passing behind his eyes. A beach, not of sand, but of black volcanic rock. The smell of cordite and salt water. The screams of men he couldn't save. The memory was gone as quickly as it came, locked back down in the vault where it lived with 1,000 others just like it. He looked at Buddy, who was now licking the last of the tuna flakes from the paper. That was what mattered. The dog, the here and now. The quiet promise he'd made to a dying friend to look after his pup. The rest was just noise. The noise, however, was about to change. It began as a distant siren, but it wasn't the familiar yelp of a police car or the wail of an ambulance. It was a piercing, urgent, electronic tone, the kind used for official escorts. Two black, unmarked SUVs, the kind that soak up light and reflect nothing, came screaming down the coastal highway, ignoring traffic lights. They swerved into the park's entrance, their tires chewing up the manicured lawn as they screeched to a halt not 50 feet from the bench. Doors flew open before the vehicles had fully stopped. 4 men in dark, impeccably tailored suits emerged from the first SUV, moving with a fluid, predatory grace that screamed federal agent. From the second vehicle stepped a man in the crisp, white uniform of a United States Navy captain, his face grim and set. An aide, a lieutenant commander, was half a step behind him. They didn't look around. They didn't ask for directions. Their eyes swept the small crowd, dismissed Finch and the onlookers in a nanosecond, and locked onto the old man on the bench. Officer Grant had stopped about 20 feet away, his hand resting instinctively on his service weapon, not as a threat, but as a nervous habit. He recognized the look on the faces of the men in suits. He'd seen it on Force Recon teams. They were Secret Service or something much, much higher up the food chain. They formed a loose, protective perimeter as the captain strode forward, his polished black shoes making no sound on the grass. He moved with the unshakable confidence of a man who commanded warships, but as he approached the bench, his entire demeanor shifted. The arrogance of command was replaced by something else entirely, pure, undiluted reverence. Marcus Finch saw the impressive arrival and his chest puffed out even further. Finally, some real authority. He turned to the approaching captain, ready to present his case and demonstrate his diligent enforcement of park ordinances. "Captain, thank you for arriving. This individual has been non-compliant and is in violation of several city codes," he began, holding up his citation book as if it were a holy text. The captain walked past him as if he were a statue. His eyes, a sharp, piercing blue, never left Jedediah. He came to a halt precisely 3 feet from the old man, his back ramrod straight. The world seemed to hold its breath. The sea breeze died down. The gulls fell silent. Then the captain's right hand snapped up in a salute so sharp, so precise, it seemed to cut the air. It was not a casual gesture. It was a salute of profound, almost worshipful respect, the kind a soldier gives to a legend. "Quote Oiki," the captain said, his voice a clear, powerful baritone that carried across the park. Quote on 17. Jedediah looked from the captain to his dog and then back again. He slowly, stiffly rose to his feet. He didn't return the salute, that part of his life was over, but he gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. The captain held his salute, his arm trembling slightly with the strain of maintaining its perfect form. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy. It was Finch who broke it. "Phoenix, what?" he sputtered, his face a mask of utter bewilderment. "What is going on? This man is a vagrant. I'm citing him." He stepped forward, trying to interpose himself between the captain and Jedediah. The lieutenant commander, the captain's aide, moved with impossible speed. He didn't touch Finch, but he somehow occupied the space Finch was about to enter, a human wall of quiet menace. He turned his head slowly, and his eyes, cold as a winter sea, pinned Finch to the spot. "Mr. Finch," the aide said, his voice quiet but carrying the deadly weight of a sniper's bullet. Code 21. Finch's mouth opened and closed like a fish on a dock. "The man you are attempting to cite," the aide continued, his voice a low clinical monotone, "is not a vagrant. He is, for all intents and purposes, a living national treasure. His actual name and rank are classified above your security clearance, above my security clearance, and likely above the captain's. We know him only by his designation. Phoenix 1. The aide took a small step closer to Finch, whose face was beginning to lose its color. He was the architect and first field commander of the Aegis Special Missions Unit, a Tier 1 asset so secret that its existence has never been officially acknowledged. The operations he led are the stuff of legend, whispered about at Langley and the Pentagon. Operation Nightfall Serpent? The recovery of the Hades device from the bottom of the Arctic? The Damascus extraction? That was all him. He has been awarded the Navy Cross 3 times, the Silver Star 5 times, and a Medal of Honor that he was awarded in a classified ceremony and declined to accept because, in his words, he was just doing his job. The crowd was utterly silent now, the teenagers' phones still recording, but their smirks long gone, replaced by expressions of shock and awe. The aide wasn't finished. He gestured toward Jedediah's worn jacket. Quote 25. The aide's gaze then dropped to the empty can of tuna and the piece of wax paper on the ground. His voice softened, but lost none of its intensity. And as for his last dime, I can assure you, his pension could buy this entire park. But he lives simply. He eats what's cheap so that his dog, the last living link to his best friend who died in his arms in Kandahar, can eat well. The man you called a vagrant has sacrificed more for this country than you can possibly comprehend. You are not fit to speak his name, let alone write him a ticket for feeding his dog. Finch had shrunk. The proud, authoritative park administrator was gone, replaced by a pale, trembling man who looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. His face was a ghastly white, his eyes wide with the horror of his own monumental ignorance. He looked at Jedediah, at this quiet, unassuming old man, and saw him for the first time. He saw the weight of history in his slumped shoulders, the fire of a warrior banked deep in his faded eyes. He saw a giant he had tried to swat like a fly. Officer Grant, standing by, felt a lump form in his throat. It all made sense now. The posture, the stillness, the tattoo. It was the quiet dignity of a man who had walked through hell and come back, choosing peace, not because he was weak, but because he was strong enough to lay his sword down. The captain finally lowered his salute, though his posture remained rigid. Quote 27, he said, turning his full attention back to Jedediah. Quote 28. Jedediah's eyes sharpened. The old, weary man seemed to recede, and for a moment someone else looked out from his face, someone younger, harder, and infinitely more dangerous. Phoenix 1 was listening. The rescue protocols, the captain continued, the emergency override systems, the sub's entire neural network, you designed them 30 years ago. The engineers at NAVSEA are stumped. There are backdoors and fail-safes in the code that only you know. Sir, they're running out of time. We need you to walk them through it. We need your mind. Jedediah stared past the captain, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon where the sky met the sea. He was seeing not the blue water of the Pacific, but the cold, black, crushing darkness of the deep ocean. He was seeing the schematics he'd drawn by hand, the lines of code he'd written himself, the fail-safes he'd built into the system, redundancies within redundancies. He looked down at Buddy, who whined softly, sensing the shift in his master. He then looked back at the captain. He gave a single, decisive nod. The decision was made. The quiet life was on hold. A silent understanding passed through the assembled group. One of the men in suits stepped forward to discreetly retrieve the piece of wax paper and the empty tuna can, leaving no trace of the incident. Jedediah knelt down, his old knees protesting, and wrapped his arms around Buddy's neck, burying his face in the dog's soft fur. He whispered something only the dog could hear. When he stood up, he looked around, his eyes scanning for a solution to the one problem the Navy hadn't considered. His gaze met Officer Grant's. Grant didn't hesitate. He took a step forward, his own training and instincts taking over. "Sir," Grant said, his voice thick with emotion, "I'll watch him. I'll take care of your dog." He unclipped the spare leash from his duty belt. "My shift is over in an hour. He can stay with me. For as long as you need. I swear it." The respect in the young officer's voice was absolute, a bond of service recognized across generations. Jedediah looked at Grant, truly seeing him, and saw the steady, reliable heart of a fellow warrior. He handed the worn leather leash to the young cop. "He likes to sleep at the foot of the bed," Jedediah said softly, the only instruction he gave. He patted Buddy's head one last time, a final, gentle touch. Then he turned and walked with the captain toward the waiting SUV. He didn't look at Marcus Finch. He didn't look at the stunned crowd. The complete and utter absence of his attention was a more profound judgment than any words could ever be. As he walked, the stoop in his shoulders seemed to lessen, his stride becoming more purposeful. He wasn't Jedediah, the old man in the park, anymore. He was Phoenix One, and he had a job to do. The crowd parted for him in absolute silence. Officer Grant sat on the bench, Jedediah's leash held firmly in his hand as Buddy leaned against his leg. He watched the black SUVs execute a perfect J-turn and speed away, their sirens once again clearing a path, this time for a hero returning to the world he had tried so hard to leave behind.